Hey everyone, Julian Cross here, back with Regulation Rangers. Always exciting to break down the rules that shape our world. Elena Harper's with me today, of course, our expert on all things regulatory.
Absolutely.
So Elena, ready to jump into this stack of new regs?
Always ready. Let's get into it.
All right, so let's kick things off with something close to my heart food, watermelons, to be exact.
Okay.
The USDA is increasing that assessment rate for watermelon producers. And importers, too.
That's interesting how it ties into inflation, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. The Watermelon Research and Promotion Plan, it uses these assessments, you see, to fund research, marketing, helps the industry thrive, even with, prices going up.
So it's kind of a trade-off then. Producers, importers, they're facing higher costs.
Right.
Domestic growers, like with 10 acres or more, they're seeing their rates jump from 6 to 9 cents per hundredweight.
Mm-hmm.
But the industry as a whole, it gets a boost. Makes me wonder how this will affect watermelon prices down the line.
Yeah, that's a good question. You have to balance supporting the whole industry. But also, what about the burden on individual producers?
Right. Something to keep an eye on.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little. Let's talk aviation.
Okay.
The FAA, they've been busy.
Always.
And it's not just about, keeping those planes up in the air. They're making a bunch of airspace modifications around a bunch of airports and bases.
Airspace, it's a resource, Like any other, you've got to manage it carefully.
Yeah.
Safety and efficiency, both. These changes, like take Camp Guernsey Airport in Wyoming, Buckley Space Force Base in Colorado, too. They're all about that. Tweaking the boundaries of the controlled airspace, making things clearer for both military and civilian aircraft.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They're establishing brand new Class E airspace at Austin Airport in Nevada to manage IFR traffic better.
Oh.
Think of it like creating carefully planned highways in the sky, especially for flights using instruments, rather than just what the pilot can see,
I see. With all that increasing air traffic, you need those clear corridors, extensions, too, for arrivals and departures.
Makes sense.
Same idea at Centennial Airport in Colorado. Those changes are all about accommodating growth, handling both IFR and VFR.
Lots of acronyms there. For anyone who doesn't know, IFR, that's Instrument Flight Rules, used when visibility is poor.
Right.
And VFR, that's Visual Flight Rules. So these changes are impacting a lot of flights. But speaking of specific aircraft, the FAA has also issued some airworthiness directives. Think of them like mandatory safety upgrades.
Okay, got it.
For certain planes.
These really highlight that attention to detail in aviation safety, like the one for Deutsche Aircraft GmbH. Requires a one-time inspection of bonding straps in certain models' wing tanks. Seems minor, but it's about preventing fuel vapor ignition. Could be a serious fire hazard.
They're sweating the small stuff. Then there's Airbus helicopters. Some models, their searchlights need electrical bonding modifications.
So it turns out those searchlights, they were at risk of failing during lightning strikes.
Oh, wow.
These modifications are all about keeping them on when they're needed most.
Another example of safety first, even for something that might seem like just a small detail.
Exactly.
And finally, there's a directive that requires replacing certain engine components in CFM International SA engines. Not exactly sure what prompted that, but I'm guessing it's a big deal if they're mandating replacements.
Engine integrity is paramount in aviation. These directives really underscore that ongoing proactive approach to safety in the industry.
Okay, let's take a breath of fresh air. Literally, let's talk about environmental regulations.
Okay.
The EPA's been making some waves.
One that stands out is regional haze. That air pollution, it obscures views in national parks, wilderness areas. Yeah. They've extended that deadline for states to submit their regional haze plans to 2031.
Wow, 2031. That's a pretty big extension. What's the thinking there?
Well, creating those plans, it's a lot. Assessing pollution sources, modeling the impact on visibility, then figuring out how to reduce emissions. It's complicated. You have economic considerations, environmental protection.
I see. Makes sense they need more time. Seems some states are having better luck than others when it comes to those specific air quality plans.
That's true. Delaware had a bit of a ride. At first, the EPA disapproved of their plan regarding ozone and sulfur dioxide, said it didn't meet the targets, but now they've adjusted their stance, made some compliance elements voluntary.
More of a cooperative approach now.
Right.
But Texas, on the other hand...
The EPA wasn't happy with their plans. for meeting those ozone standards. In some major areas, they said Texas didn't really show how they'd reach those targets. Could mean stricter regulations down the road if they don't step up.
Kind of a warning shot, maybe.
Possibly.
And get this, the EPA has decided not to regulate lead wheel weights. Those little things used to balance tires.
Right.
This is where things get tricky. Lead exposure, especially for kids, it's a serious concern.
Yeah.
But the EPA's analysis, it suggests that lead from these weights, they don't really contribute much to soil and dust contamination. I can see both sides. This one will definitely spark some debate.
No doubt.
It shows how regulations have to weigh potential risks against the evidence. And the economic impact, too. Rarely an easy answer.
You got that right.
Definitely food for thought there. Let's head over to Utah for a second.
Okay.
The EPA's given the thumbs up to their updated hazardous waste program.
Okay.
They'll be handling more of the permitting for those facilities that deal with hazardous waste.
That shows a good deal of trust from the EPA in Utah's ability to handle these responsibilities.
Definitely a positive step for environmental protection in the state. Ready to dive into the world of finance.
Bring it on.
Okay, first up, the IRS. Always a hot topic. They've implemented new regulations requiring supervisory approval for some penalties. All about accountability, really, making sure those penalties are justified and have been reviewed by someone higher up.
Good news for anyone worried about being unfairly penalized. Always good to have those checks and balances.
Absolutely. Now let's talk pensions. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, or PBGC for short, they've shifted to a new method for figuring out the interest assumptions used to value pension benefits.
This change gets into the details of those pension calculations, affects how companies figure out their pension liabilities, could have an impact on payouts for those getting close to retirement.
Yeah, definitely something folks should discuss with their financial advisors, especially as they near retirement.
It's all about being informed.
Speaking of being informed, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, is making things a bit easier. For the smaller lenders, in the mortgage market, I mean.
They're adjusting that asset size exemption threshold for some mortgage loan rules.
So smaller banks, credit unions, they might be able to offer more loans without that same level of, regulatory scrutiny as the larger institutions.
Potentially good news for borrowers in areas that aren't well served by big banks, and it could boost competition in the mortgage market too.
Exactly. It's a way to encourage lending.
Right.
Where it's needed most.
Right.
Okay, let's zoom out. Global stage now.
Right.
Let's talk international trade. The U.S. is getting stricter about export controls on certain chemicals and biological agents.
They're following the lead of the Australia Group, that international organization, working to stop the spread of chemical and biological weapons.
Makes sense, given the potential dangers.
Yeah.
Right, the U.S. is tightening the reins on who can export these materials and where they can go. Wow. It impacts businesses in, like, the biotech and chemical industries.
Adds complexity to their operations, but the goal is to prevent those materials from falling into the wrong hands. Critical for global security.
Absolutely. Let's trade our passports for hiking boots.
Okay.
Head over to the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area in Georgia.
What's going on there?
The National Park Service is opening up more trails for cyclists, but they're doing it carefully.
Oh, good.
Limiting the trail width and building on already disturbed corridors to keep the environmental impact low.
Good example of how recreation and conservation can work together.
Exactly. All right, last stop.
Okay.
We're blasting off into space. With some news from the FCC, that's the agency that manages our airwaves. They're streamlining the licensing and coordination procedures for space launch services.
With the commercial space industry taking off, this is a good move. Cut the red tape, encourage innovation, make sure things run smoothly.
It's like air traffic control.
Yeah.
But for rockets and satellites.
And speaking of which, the FCC wants public comment on how to choose a frequency coordinator for those space launches.
All about preventing interference with other wireless communications, right?
Yeah, those coordinators, they're key to keeping the signals from colliding, making sure there's clear communication in space.
Crucial role, for sure. Okay, last stop before we wrap up this section. Railroads. The Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA. They've extended that comment period for 2 proposed regulations.
One focuses on track geometry measurement system inspection.
Kind of a checkup to make sure the tracks are in good shape, prevent derailments.
And the other's all about positive train control systems. Those can slow down or stop trains automatically to avoid collisions.
Safety's super important in the rail industry.
Absolutely.
These systems, they're vital for preventing accidents. The FRA is taking their time to get feedback before finalizing these rules.
Makes sense.
Now let's wrap up with a look at two new systems of records, focusing on privacy.
Okay.
The Department of Health and Human Services is making one for child abuse investigations related to unaccompanied minors.
This system, it's about keeping those individuals with, substantiated abuse allegations from working in those facilities that care for these vulnerable children.
A critical measure
Oh.
to ensure their safety. And the Department of Defense, they're setting up a system to manage information about service members who have been incarcerated under military law. I mean,
Good.
it'll track a lot.
Yeah.
Everything from confinement status to health assessments. And, it'll help streamline the clemency and parole evaluation process.
So two very different systems, but both dealing with privacy and data management.
Exactly. It's a reminder that regulations touch on almost every part of our lives,
That's true.
from the food we eat to the air we breathe, finances we manage, the technology we use.
Well said. Quite a journey through the regulatory landscape today. It's fascinating, isn't it?
What is?
How all these regulations, seemingly all over the place,
Yeah.
they all point to something similar.
Like what?
Balance.
Okay.
Across all these different sectors, there's this constant effort to find this equilibrium between competing interests.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about those regional haze plans. The EPA, they're giving states more time. They get it. It's complicated. But they're not changing that ultimate goal. Cleaner air. That's balance. Recognizing it's difficult, but staying focused on the big picture.
Like walking a tightrope,
Right.
Economic concerns on one side,
Exactly.
environmental protection on the other.
And it's not just about those two either.
Right.
Take the FCC and those space launches, they're streamlining licensing, to boost innovation, but also carefully managing that radio spectrum.
So things don't go haywire.
Yeah. It's a delicate dance.
It's not just what they're regulating either.
Right.
It's how they're doing it.
True.
Mandatory rules, voluntary guidelines, asking for public comment.
Sometimes you need a firm hand. Sometimes a nudge is better.
Makes you think they realize that one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't work.
It doesn't. The regulatory toolbox, it's diverse. You've got to choose the right tool for the job.
Speaking of balance, I noticed something.
Oh.
In the USDA's food distribution programs, improvements. It's small, but they're switching out a term. Donated commodities is out. USDA foods is in. Seems minor, but I think it says a lot.
I see what you mean. Yeah, it shifts the framing. It's not charity anymore. It's about dignity. Access to food, not handouts.
Right. Even a small change can have a ripple effect on how these programs are seen and run. Makes you think about the power of words.
Absolutely. But speaking of ripples, let's zoom out even more.
Okay.
All this is happening. Technology's changing so fast. Are regulations keeping up?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. Think about AI, space, biotech, these fields. They're moving so quickly. Can regulations adapt fast enough?
And that brings us back to balance.
It does. We need rules that work, but are also flexible so they can guide us in these new areas. It's tough.
We need that sweet spot. Clear guidelines,
Yeah.
but also being able to adapt. Not easy, but essential if we want these regulations to do what they should, protect, guide, create a better future.
Well said. This is a conversation that has to continue. Hopefully we've given everyone listening something to think about.
Regulations, they might not be exciting, but they're the framework of our society.
They affect us all, whether we realize it or not.
So stay informed, stay curious, keep those questions coming.
And if you want to learn more about any of these regulations, head over to www.topiclake.com. You'll find all the source documents there.
That wraps up our look at today's regulations.
Thanks for tuning in to Regulation Rangers.